What's up, everyone? Thank you. Welcome for coming here once again. My name is Chimoge, and this is Chimoge's Comments America. This is my weekly live stream. As always, we start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, plus African time. And tonight, African time is taking us to 8:26 p.m. It's a beautiful thing. But anyway, I'm going to be doing a commentary action for you guys tonight. So please like the video. Also share it with people you know. And if you're watching this on recording, do the same thing as well. And do it on whatever platform you're on as well, because this live is happening on YouTube, but the video is going to go out on all platforms. But as usual, I'm going to give you all 4 minutes. That is 4 minutes. Just to, get acclimated and, get on the live before I begin. So in the meantime, I'll just play all some music and chill. All right. think that's been about 4 minutes. Let's go ahead and begin. So tonight, and again, thank you all for joining me. Tonight, I'm going to be reacting to this video from BNC News. And BNC News, I don't know who owns it, but I always see Marc Lamont Hill on there. So he's like a major interviewer they got there. Maybe he's the one who heads it up, maybe not. But anyway, like basically like it seems to be just him interviewing people. So this is a video clip of Marc Lamont Hill interviewing this lady who I believe her name is like Pamela something. I'll remember the exact name when I pull up the video. But basically she wrote an op-ed saying that Black Americans need to stop voting for the Democrats, right? Which is something I agree with. It's an opinion I've expressed on this channel multiple times. It's something I'm going to go into even more detail in the future. But tonight, I'm hoping by reacting to this video, I'm going to be able to get a lot of my ideas out there and y'all kind of see what I have to say about that and where I'm coming from. But let me just first kind of change how my screen is set up and then show y'all the video. Hold on 1 second. This. Jesus. Sorry, folks. Give me a sec. Hold on, people. Let me put back on the music. I'm not sure why this isn't working. Give me a sec. All right. Sorry about that. Looks like I got it to work. Let me just make sure y'all are seeing what I'm seeing. I got it to work. Okay. Looks like we're good. We're in business. All right. So here's the video. And I'm just going to read the description of the video. Why Black Americans should quote unquote break up with the Democratic Party. And by the way, I've never seen this video before. And it's from November 16th of 2021. So almost a year ago now. But it's still very relevant. Especially now when the midterm elections are so close. They are actually in a couple weeks, yeah. Because let me even look it up. What day are the midterms happening on? I mean, I guess they're not all going to be literally the same. Yeah, okay. Here it says Tuesday, November 8th. So that's literally about 2 weeks. They'll probably all be around that time. I don't remember if they're all on the exact same day. It looks like they are. This says that as well. Maybe as someone who lived in the U.S. my whole life, I should know that exactly. But I got a lot on the brain. Anyway, folks. So let me read the description, just so y'all can get a sense of what they're going to say if you don't already know. So, it's no secret that many Black Americans are disgruntled with the Democratic Party and feel like they are taken for granted. In a recent Newsweek opinion article, contributor Pamela Denise Long, that's the name of the lady Marc Lamont Hill is going to be interviewing. I know I forgot her exact name earlier. Apologies to her if she ever watches this, and shout out to her as well. But contributor Pamela Denise Long said, "It's time for Black America to break up with the Democratic Party," and goes on to say, "If they want our votes, let them earn them." Long, who is also a diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism trainer, joins Marc Lamont Hill on Black News Tonight to discuss why Black people should divorce the Democratic Party. All this and more on Black News Tonight. All right, let's get into it. Let's watch the video.
Secret, many Black Americans are disgruntled with the Democratic Party. They feel like they're taken for granted, and time again.
Let me get rid of the captions. Sorry about that, y'all.
Voting as the most united bloc African Americans are. But at the end, the demands of Black people remain unfulfilled by the Democratic leadership. In a recent Newsweek opinion article, contributor Pamela Denise Long declares, "It is time for Black America to break up with the Democratic Party." She goes on to say, "If they want our votes, let them earn them." And Pamela Denise Long joins me now. She is diversity.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here. Obviously, the setup for this is real obvious. Marc Lamont Hill is just kind of outlining the problem, introducing the interviewer. But what y'all got to know about Marc Lamont Hill that frames this, if y'all don't already know, is that Marc Lamont Hill right now is basically just a puppet for the Democratic Party. He's just a puppet for the center left. It is what it is. He says all their talking points, everything, right? He didn't used to be that, though, right? He used to actually be a strong advocate of the Green Party and was really a strong kind of far left person. He was never really a, what would I call it? Like a real Afrocentric person, if you know what I mean. He was never... Like, he's never been someone who was, working from an ideology that wasn't white. But at least before, it was kind of radical white ideology. And he was also very, like, pro-Palestine. That's kind of why he got fired from CNN, actually. Um, but yeah, but something happened around the time Trump. Ooh, no, it wasn't when Trump got elected. It was actually the 2020 election. Around that time, when I noticed he changed up big time, and now he is what he is, right? So he's just the voice of the Democratic establishment, the voice of the center left, the voice of the Puritans in blackface, interviewing this lady who is kind of saying some real stuff that, you know, black people really can't just let the Democratic Party take our votes for granted. Now, I'm not familiar with her before this video, so I don't know the complete ins and outs of her politics. But it seems to me like she's more like radical, like she goes against the grain more than the Democrats would want her to. But when you see in the bio, when they're talking about how she's a diversity, equity, inclusion educator, doing that kind of stuff is still kind of in the zone. Like it might be on the edge depending on how you do it, but it's still kind of in the zone of what liberals and Democrats want black people to do. So my guess is, even though she's saying some real stuff, she's kind of more safe than most people saying that stuff, if that makes sense, which is why they're even bringing her on. But what I'm guessing is going to happen is that Marc Lamont Hill is going to try and argue her out of her point. And really the goal of that is to get any of the black people watching who are thinking of no longer supporting the Democrats or already not supporting the Democrats to reverse that position. All right. So let's keep watching.
Equity, inclusion, and anti-racism trainer. She's also a brilliant writer, clearly. Welcome to the show. Good to see you. You call black Americans voting for the Democratic Party an arranged marriage. Now you're calling for a divorce. Tell me why.
Yeah, so it's an arranged marriage because, as I clarified in the article, Black Americans back in the day when Republicans and Democrats kind of switched their platforms didn't really have a choice if they were going to stay engaged with American politics. And at that time in the 60s, obviously it was very critical that they do. And it's very critical now that Black Americans stay engaged with the political process as well. Democrats have not delivered, even though they've had the House, both houses, as well as the White House. They haven't delivered specifically for Black Americans, and also quite specifically for descendants of slavery who make up the vast majority of the Black American population.
Okay. There we go. All right, now I kind of understand more of the angle this lady's coming from. So this lady seems like she's on that ADOS FBA wave. And for those of y'all who don't know what that is, ADOS and FBA are two groups that basically are, how do I explain it easily? Because forgive me, because it's one of those things where what they're trying to do on the surface is real simple, but when you dig into it, it's kind of complicated to explain just because what they're actually trying to do is so stupid it doesn't make any sense. But if I can really explain it, what ADOS and FBA are trying to do is that they want to advocate they want to advocate specifically for what they think are the issues of Black Americans who don't have what most people would call an immigrant background. So Black Americans whose families have been here since like before the Civil War and were mostly enslaved here, right? As opposed to having parents who came over as immigrants within the last few decades, right? That's what they try and do. But then along with that, they also push a lot of hate against Black immigrants and the children of Black immigrants. And, you know, they operate off of this, like they do what they do based off of this false idea. I mean, there's a bunch of false ideas, but essentially, I think the best way to sum up the false ideas they operate off of is the idea that, you know, the type of Black people they're trying to advocate for suffered more in general, but then also specifically uh, as a result of stuff the U.S. did than other black people, which is not true, okay? Because we know that uh, Eurasian dominance and white supremacy was global. They hit black people all over the globe. And then if you're being real and you look at it, black people who are in America have it a little less bad than the black people outside just because they have American privilege. Like, for example, all the money that America steals from everyone else, some of it trickles down to the black people in America, which is why black people in America have more money on average than black people anywhere else. Still poor in the American context, like compared to other Americans, still have less money, but they have way more money than, like on average, than any other nationality of black people. And then of course they get perceived better, things like that. So the thing they're operating off of is false. And then also when you dig into it more, really, trying to make a hard distinction between so-called ADOS, which stands for American Descendants of Slavery, and that acronym is just stupid for so many reasons. But without getting too deep into that, stupid, or FBA, which stands for Foundational Black Americans, which is also a stupid acronym. I think eventually when I do, because I'm gonna do some lectures about nationality and nationalism, things like that nature. So I'll probably touch on these movements in there in more detail. But for now, without getting too deep into them, the group of black people they're talking about, you can't really draw a hard line between them and other people. Because one, if you know the history of slavery, right? If you know the history of slavery, basically all of the black people who were enslaved in the U.S. were enslaved in the Caribbean first, right? Because they would bring them from Africa to the Caribbean. They would break them down there, and then some people in America would buy them and they'd come there. So then why wouldn't you call those people Caribbean, right? And then also there are people who went back and forth. There's some black people who were enslaved in the U.S., but they were sold back to the Caribbean. Some of them would later move back to the Caribbean. We know some of them moved back to the continent of Africa eventually, places like Liberia, Sierra Leone. And even some of those people eventually migrated into Nigeria, right? So drawing these hard lines don't make sense. And then even when you consider like, well, if you really want to get deep into it, yeah, I'm gonna go here. If you really want to go deep into it, like how do you draw? If you want to define these so-called ADOS people based off of being enslaved, right? How are you gonna draw a hard line between them and then the so-called like black immigrants when a lot of, you have some black people who come to this country even recently against their will, like human trafficking is a thing, right? Some people get trafficked from Africa to the Caribbean here. So they're not willing migrants in. You could also think of children. A child doesn't want to, and again, obviously being a child is not as bad as being a slave. Although trafficking, you're being human trafficked, you literally are a slave, right? So that is the same thing. But a child, right, isn't really like a willing migrant, right? Even though obviously not the same as slavery. But I'm just saying, right? Typically an immigrant is defined as someone who like willingly came to the U.S. But then even when you think of like refugees, right? Even like the average immigrant, right? If you're talking about how willing they are to come to the U.S., like they're only coming to the U.S. because their home country got destroyed by the U.S., right? There's not much opportunities. There's a lot of violence. So a lot of them come over here as official refugees. And even a lot of the other ones that don't get labeled refugees, I mean, you could easily say they're an economic refugee or even just a refugee from violence. They just haven't been labeled like that because, you know, they if they had a free choice, they would still be in their country. It's just there's a lot of violence, poverty going on in their country. So then it's like, even just drawing that hard line, it doesn't make sense. Because really, at the end of the day, when you look at it, it's just you just have a bunch of people, black people with different experiences, different family histories, different levels of desire to come to the U.S., right? And they just exist along a spectrum. So drawing this hard line and saying even some are ADOS, some are not, and then all the ADOS Americans suffered more than the immigrants. And then on top of that, that the immigrants are taking away from the ADOS people, because that's another big part of their ideology. It just doesn't make sense. Because, and I know I'm going on and on, but I just want to give you all the context in case you didn't know. But a big part of those movements is advocating for reparations, which obviously black people deserve, but I think the way they go about it just doesn't make sense. But without going into that, they've been a big push for reparations for slavery. But of course, they mix that with their kind of anti-immigrant hate and stuff, and it comes out to something totally not good. But anyway, the how this relates to this lady is those people have been agitating a lot, especially online. Right? You don't really see them as much in real life. Like you'll get black people in real life who you know, might kind of have those sentiments, but as far as being like all into those movements, like, yeah, I'm ADOS and I'm advocating for reparations for ADOS specifically, and that's my life purpose, you know, that kind of energy, you don't really see that as much in real life. But online, they got a big presence. And, you know, one thing they've been saying is, hey, if you don't give us reparations, we won't vote for the Democrats. We won't vote for you. So it looks like this lady is kind of a representative of that group, and they have brought her on to kind of try and talk to and appease that group while also talking them off of the edge of the cliff, so to speak, so they keep voting Democrat. So I know I paused the video for a while and I talked a lot, but I just wanted to give you all the context based off of what I'm seeing so far. Let's continue.
You say that while progressives accuse the right of not talking about anti-black racism, when the left does talk about anti-black racism, they do so to use our pain, not for our benefit. That's a quote from you. It sounds like you're criticizing the kind of performative gestures toward racial justice that we often see from the left. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so, you know, it's both performative in terms of the wordsmithing that happens, as well as in terms of how we haven't disaggregated the data on the impact of the policies that are being implemented at the level that is not pass or minimize the impact that and responsibility, the impact and responsibility that state as well as regional and local governments have. What I mean by that is I need to see specific implementation plans that show that these diversity policies are actually transforming the lives and economic stability of Black American communities, Black American homes, and Black American families and workers. So this idea of it being performative as well as it not being precise in who it is intended to impact and how. It is, I think, a dereliction of duty if we levy the responsibility of looking at impact on foundations and not-for-profit organizations. Our government, who created many of the problems, right, that are affecting multi-generational Black Americans, need to be responsible for looking at and developing those metrics, ensuring that that impact is positive.
Over the past 6 months, we have been investigating as well as exposing the truth behind all these food processing plants that have been
but anyway, I'll just pause that real quickly, address what else she said. So basically, she's raising a good point that a lot of stuff the Democrats do is just for show. They're not really about it. they'll come out here and say, oh, we love black people, blah, blah, blah. We're with you. The Republicans are racist. We're not like them. They'll put on some kente cloth. They'll kneel. You know, Bill Clinton will get out and play the saxophone. They'll do all this nonsense. But at the end of the day, they don't actually back up their words with actions. And that relates to another thing she said, where some of the stuff they do isn't precise, specific to black people. That's what she meant when she said it's not precise. Because a lot of the time when Democrats do something, they'll just say that it's for minorities in general, or it's for people of color. But of course those terms include people who aren't black. So that's people like East Asians, you might have West Asians like Arabs, and then you'll have other groups of people that are technically black because they got black blood, but most of their DNA is Eurasian, and most people don't really consider them black or no. So that would be like, for example, so-called non-black Hispanics, right? Like, think of your typical like mestizo Hispanic person, or even just a white Hispanic person would be in the people of color category as well. South Asians also, not all of them even have black blood, especially if they're from North India. But some of the ones from southern India, okay, they'll have some black blood, but might be, depending on the individual, right, a minority of their DNA, and it's not something they really consciously identify with, and it's not something that other people consciously realize about them. So, you know, if you give the money to those groups, it doesn't quite have the same impact in terms of building up black people, right? So that's something she spoke to, and that was facts there. Let's continue.
I understand and even agree with the critique of the Democratic Party's relationship to black people. It's exploitative. They take us for granted. And at the analytic level, we are a captured electorate. That is to say, they know they got us. If we vote, we voting for them. I get that. But we have a few practical options. That's what people will push back and say, right? That the realpolitik is that we either don't vote, we vote for an alternative party, or we vote for Republicans. And that voting for an alternative party doesn't give us the power to defeat Republicans in major elections, maybe in a local election, a mayoralty is probably the best case scenario. And that if we vote Republican, or at least hold out the possibility that we'll vote Republican, that we may get more from the Democratic Party, but we're kind of cutting our nose to spite our face because Republicans don't serve our interests in any way. So how, as a practical matter, can we leverage our votes in different ways when the options, the alternatives, are so bad?
Yeah, those are very, very valid points. And I often hear that critique. I think one of the things that we as a people, and I mean that by the American people, one of the things that we've done is we've let the polls determine the narrative. We have let the polar ends, the extremes of both parties, determine our direction, right? They've been the gatekeepers. The bulk of the American public is in the middle. The bulk of the American public doesn't want ideology. What they actually want is solutions. They actually want the same things Black Americans want, which is for people, families, and communities to be resourced. So that's first, is we, the majority, truly the majority of the American people, have to set the narrative. We, as Black Americans, as well as white Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, all voting Americans, really need to say that it is no longer acceptable that you can determine your party orientation and decide based on that alone which segments of the American population you're going to choose to neglect. The challenge, the new paradigm is we're all going to eat. And if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, how are you going to ensure specific redress to specific folks, Black Americans being the ones that we're talking about tonight, to ensure that we can all thrive? That has not been the narrative. I know that is similar to what Democrats have talked about, but we aren't seeing that translated into Black communities, are we? So even they aren't there yet.
Okay. Yo. Shawty's wildin', yo. Woo! Shawty was wildin'. Woo. Alright, I almost don't even know where to begin. Like, she started mostly strong, but that section I just played for you before I paused it, she just said crazy thing upon crazy thing. Alright, let me break it down for y'all, in case y'all don't see what I'm talking about. In case y'all don't understand why I just left the room to clear my head and came back. So first of all, obviously Marc Lamont, he'll pose his question. Those are good questions that get posed, but they have pretty simple answers. Because basically his question was, how can black people stop voting Democrat if all our other options are bad, right? And I have my answer to that, which is very different than hers. Because hers was crazy. Because, first of all, what she said in response was that we have to stop letting the poles, as in the polar opposites, basically she meant the extremes, determine the agenda, right? So, first off there, she kind of made a mistake in analyzing the situation, because she said that she thinks that the polar extremes of the Democratic and the Republican Party are the ones driving the agenda of both parties. That is false. With the Republican Party, sure, the far-right people, right, the most underprivileged white tribes, because as we know, all these different white ideologies just line up with different tribes, different lineages, right? So these underprivileged white tribes do have a lot of influence in the Republican Party. That's how Trump got elected. But they are not necessarily more powerful than the tribes that make up the Republican establishment, okay? You could have a debate about whether they're equal or whether the one is a little bit more powerful than the other, but you can't say that the far right is in complete control, right? Evidence of that is just if you look at when Trump was in office, right? He wasn't able to do everything his supporters wanted him to do, okay? He wasn't able to just deport all the Hispanic immigrants. He wasn't able to deport all the Muslims. He just wasn't able to do all that stuff they wanted him to do, right? And a big part of that is that the Republican establishment, right, the center right, the what should I call them? I guess the more privileged tribes other than the Puritans, like the planters, right? Those people who are on the right were in his way. He had to deal with them, right? Because he had to kind of come to an agreement with them to stay in power, right? So that's some evidence of that. So you can't say that the far right completely dictates the agenda. And then in the Democratic Party, it's even more obvious that the extremes aren't driving the agenda, right? Because what the Democratic Party does is exactly what the Puritans want. Sure, the far left got a little louder, like over the past 6 or 7 years, right? Bernie Sanders had success as a candidate relative to what he did before, but overall he didn't succeed. I'll say it another way. Bernie Sanders did better than he did before, but he didn't succeed. He still didn't get that nomination. And sure, like some of these more extreme left-wing talking points you hear a lot online, right? Some of the more extreme left-wing talking points you hear a lot online, right? You might see a lot of people online saying they're a socialist and they love socialism. But the Democratic Party has not actually acted in alignment with those talking points, right? The Democratic Party has not actually gone out and put in place socialist policy, right? The Democratic Party has not actually gone out and put in place really transformative pro-LGBT policy, for example, they haven't gone in and implemented the type of anti-racist policy the far left is talking about, right? So you can't say they're the ones driving the discussion. You can't say they're the one driving how the parties actually act. That's just a big mistake in analysis, right? But then what she said got way worse after saying all that. Because then she said that most Americans are in the middle, just like black Americans. And that's where you got to say, whoa. She said that most Americans are in the middle and they want what black Americans want. My sister, with all due respect, are you out of your mind? My sister, with all due respect, are you out of your mind? If you think that the average white American wants what the average black American wants, you are living in la la land. Okay? You are off in a fantasy space somewhere. Right? And this, believing things like that a lot of the time is how black Americans get played, right? Because we come out here and we genuinely believe that we and white people have the same goals. You might think, oh, it's just the white person's a little mean. Oh, maybe he calls me the N-word every once in a while, but we want the same things. We want the same things. Heck, nah, they don't want the same things at all. See, black Americans want to end racism, and they want to be able to, most of us want to be able to live in this country without experiencing racism and discrimination and freely access all the resources that the country has to offer. That's what most black Americans want. Most white Americans want black Americans out of the godforsaken country. And those of them that don't want us out of the country want us to remain here as some sort of slave force. That's what they want. The desires are not the same at all, right? And why this is important is because if you make the mistake of believing that white Americans and black Americans want the same thing, then you could make the mistake of trying to form a political alliance with white Americans. You can make the mistake of wanting to form a political coalition with white Americans. You can make the mistake of wanting to form one big integrated political group with white Americans to try and achieve the same goal. And that's the biggest mistake you could make. That's how you get played. Because if you try to do that, either the white Americans won't form any sort of alliance with you and you'll just waste all your time and energy, or they'll form the alliance with you, but they'll just use your time, your energy, your resources, and your numbers to get what they want, and you'll never get what you want. And after they get what they want, they'll toss you to the side, and they might even toss you in the fire. Okay. So this whole idea that most Americans are in the center, because even we got to even break down this idea of what the center is, but I'll do that in a second after I say this. But this idea that most Americans are in the quote-unquote center and that they want exactly what black Americans want, just totally crazy. Just totally crazy. And then on the idea of the center, right? This idea that most Americans are in the center isn't quite right? Because maybe you could say, just based by definition, okay, most Americans are in the center. But like, if you want to say that, when you look at the center, what you're going to realize is that people in that center want real different things, right? Because the most centrist position in American political thought, right, the way it's been described and organized, is actually the Puritan position, right? That's the default position. That's the normal position. Then kind of next to it is the planter position, right? Which is the Republican establishment. Whenever I say planters, think Republican establishment, okay? Because they're after the Puritans, the planters are the next most elite tribe in the U.S. Yeah, I would say, I mean, perhaps you could argue, no, sorry guys, the reason I'm hesitating is I'm thinking if maybe you could argue that people like the French might be just below the Puritans or something like, but nah, I don't, no, I would say the planters are the next most elite. You know, if I do some research that definitely contradicts that, I'll let y'all know. But for now, just say the planters are the next most elite, right? And that's the Republican establishment. Their position's also in the center. But the thing is, right, both of those groups are a minority in America in general, and even among white people, who are, of course, the majority of people in America, right? So then a lot of these other Americans in the quote-unquote center belong to either kind of middle privilege or low privilege, underprivileged white tribes, right? It really actually is more kind of like what I might call middle privilege tribes, right? Think people live in the Midwest. A lot of people with ancestry from the Nordic countries, so like Scandinavian countries, so like Denmark, Norway. You'd also have a lot of like people with German ancestry in that group. Those kind of people. A lot of them are also in what's considered the center. But those are more what you would call your swing voters, right? The people who sometimes vote Democrat, sometimes vote Republican. And even though they go back and forth between the center left and the center right, back and forth between the Puritans and the planters, they're not really doing that because they share either of their goals. They're getting oppressed by those two groups as well. It's just sometimes they're not sure which oppressor is less bad, right? But their goal is still different than either of those two groups. So all in all, when you look at it, can you really say that most white Americans that are in the quote-unquote center want the same thing? Because we got to keep in mind, you can't reduce someone's entire political agenda to how they vote, right? You cannot just boil down someone's entire political goals to how they vote, right? That is just one piece of the puzzle. That is just one step they take in going on their overall journey, so to speak, if you get what I'm saying. So, anyway, just to sum it up, all due respect to the sister, looks very smart, very intelligent. She made some good points earlier, which I acknowledge. And I agree with this overall point that it's time for Black America to break up with the Democratic Party. But what she said in that just previous like 3 minutes or so video, absolutely crazy. Okay, let's continue.
So how do we convince Black voters to do this? I mean, I'm just thinking about, again, a practical context. And you're talking to somebody who's been a member of the Green Party for 2 decades. So I'm not here caping for the Democrats. I'm just trying to make sort of think through how we can.
And that's a bit of a lie on Marc Lamont Hill's part. He was caping for Biden the last election, and you know he'll be caping for the Democrat in the next election unless he gets real brave. But I doubt it based on what I've seen from him. So, I think that, his Green Party membership right now is basically a name tag. Doesn't mean much. But anyway, let's keep going.
To convince voters of this. Let's say in the 2020 election, right? Let's say we're in a state like Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, where there was a legitimate chance that a particular member of the House or the Senate could have won, or in the governor's house, right? They could have won on the Democrat side and the Republican side. And let's say that the Republican makes a more persuasive argument. Let's say in Georgia, for example, the Republican had made a more persuasive argument than Raphael Warnock. And you say, well, look, he has black interests at heart, or she has black interests at heart more than this Democratic candidate. And black people decide to put their weight behind the Republican candidate in that case, or the third party candidate in that case. I get the logic of saying we're going to set the example, but then you lose control of the Senate, right? The Democrats control the Senate by a hair, right? We need Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. So if that is in fact the case, are we having a small victory or a symbolic victory, maybe even a Pyrrhic victory, if we choose the Republican but lose the Senate, or choose the Republican and empower them on a national scale to do tremendous amounts of harm? Do we say, look, Joe Biden clearly doesn't have a progressive agenda for black folk, but there's Donald Trump on the one hand, there's the Green Party candidate on the other, there's the Freedom Party candidate on the other, or whomever. How in an election like 2020 could we have strategically employed what you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think one thing we needed to start with this campaigning and this shifting in narrative about who gets neglected and who gets well served at the beginning, to move the candidates toward the middle instead of these polar opposites moving the population, the voting population toward their polls. So first of all, elections are a sort of culmination or milestone in the overall political process. So we have to start developing these narratives now, right? And to be, just for the record, I'm not caping for anyone except Black America, right? Except for America in general, because what we cannot continue to do is have Black America at the bottom and continuing to need support, continuing to cry out for assistance and support when our government has failed us. I think we need to, divorcing or breaking up is not saying that you have to go with Republicans. What it does say is that your vote is up for sale to the highest bidder who is going to have an agenda for you. And moving people to the middle says that if we are about America thriving, not just Black people need to demand this, all Americans need to demand this. Black Americans have used our voice, our civil rights gains, to support every social justice movement. We are owed, America needs this, and we are due.
Okay. Wow. I almost don't know what to say. That was so crazy. Let me just break it down to y'all. Because basically, so let me just break down to y'all what happened. So Marc Lamont Hill basically asked her this question. Really, he asked the same question he asked before, just in a different way. You know, how can Black America not vote Democrat if all the other options are bad? That's basically the question he asked. He said, if you don't vote Democrat, your only options are to vote Republican, who are terrible, right? Worse than the Democrats is what he said, or to vote for a third party candidate who's never going to win, right? So those are worse options than voting Democrat. So how do you not vote Democrat? That's the question he asked, right? And a lot was messed up in the way he set up that question. A lot of the assumptions behind that question are wrong, right? Well, that's the question he asked, right? But instead of getting into all that, what she basically said is that if Black people start complaining early in the election cycle, if Black people start complaining loudly early in the election cycle, and if white Americans and other Americans who she's saying actually agree with Black people join, then Black people will get what we want from the politicians. Black people will get what we need from the politicians if that happens. That's what she said. And again, no disrespect to the sister here. I ain't got nothing personal against her. Never met her. Have no reason to have anything personal against her. And for the record, I agree with, I guess, the banner statement of her opinion. It's time for Black America to break up with the Democratic Party. I agree. But it's just everything under that. Yo, it's crazy. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Because again, the idea that American politicians will ever give Black people what we want, and the even crazier idea that they will give Black people what we need, because unfortunately, a lot of us don't actually want what we need. We want other things. But the idea that we will get both of those things, either of those things, from politicians who are working within the American political system. Because keep in mind, America is a country that was set up to keep the Puritans on top. It was set up to help the Puritans oppress everyone, right? And they oppress you in order how closely related to them you are. So Black people who are less related to them than anyone else get oppressed by America the most. That's what it was designed to do. That's the spirit that was put into America. And when something is created, it always is going to, at its core, do what the spirit that was put into it set out to do. The idea that politicians working within that system are ever going to give Black Americans what they want or what they need is just wrong. That's like saying that a spider is going to give a fly what it wants or what it needs. Nah, the spider is set up to kill the fly. Delete the fly, rather. Sorry, I don't want to fall afoul of any rules by using no words, right? But the spider was designed to delete the fly. It's never going to give the fly what it needs. So, that's just flawed. But then again, also this idea that most Americans want the same thing that Black Americans want, and this idea that most Americans, that the non-Black majority of America does not agree with the oppression that Black people face in this country, that's just straight wrong. Because the truth is, the reason Black Americans are oppressed in this country is because everyone else in this country wants us to be oppressed. That might be the only thing they all agree on, that they want us to be oppressed. They might disagree on other issues. They might even disagree on exactly how to oppress us, but they agree that we should be oppressed. Because let's face it, if they didn't all agree, they could make our lives way better overnight. They could call off a lot of attacks on us overnight. We would see it. But we don't. We never have in the 200-something years of history of this country. So to make that, again, to just make this mistake of thinking that other people in this country give a rat's behind about Black Americans is just wrong. And that's where this lady, with all due respect to her, just completely loses me. All right? She loses me the way David De Gea loses a shot under his body at the World Cup. All right? Those of y'all who are soccer fans know what I'm talking about. Okay? But anyway, 9 seconds left in the video. Let's hear it out.
Agreed, 100%. Denise, thank you so much for your brilliant analysis and also
let me
for the wonderful.
Back
and moving people, Black people need to demand this. All Americans need to demand this. Black Americans have used our voice, our civil rights gains to support every social justice movement. We are owed. America needs this, and we are due.
Agreed, 100%. Denise, thank you so much for your brilliant analysis and also for the wonderful art you contributed today. We look forward to talking to you again soon in Black News Tonight.
Have you heard of executive order?
Okay, that's everything, guys, from the video. But let me just give my final thoughts. Hold on. All right. Let's get rid of that. All right, let's make me big again. All right. So, let me give my final thoughts on the video. So overall, you know, I agree with, let me get rid of this green line, sorry. But anyway, overall, I agree with what that lady, Miss Pamela, sorry, I want to get her name right. Miss Pamela Denise Long. I agree with what Sister Pamela Denise Long said overall, that Black people need to stop voting for the Democrats. I agree. But I don't agree with her why. I don't agree with her reasoning for why we should do that at all. And I think it's important that we get the reasoning right, because if we don't know why we're doing it, we could get easily talked out of doing it when we see certain things happen, right? So, as I said before, we're not doing it because, you know, somehow doing it is going to very easily get politicians to change their mind, or it's going to get a majority of Americans that already agree with us and want the same things we want to do what we want to do. That's not why it's happening, okay? Because we got to keep in mind, no one else in America wants what we want. And no one else in America wants us to get what we need, okay? Really, the only reason we're avoiding voting for the Democrats is because that's the best way to use our leverage, right? And what do I mean by that? First of all, let me explain this by breaking down the flaws in the question Marc Lamont Hill kept asking, which is, how can Black people in America avoid voting Democrat when all the other options are worse? That question is flawed because all the other options aren't worse. Let me tell you why. First of all, Republicans, and again, I've said it a bunch on this channel, I'll say it again, I'm not here to cape for Republicans. I've never voted for a Republican. I don't think I ever will, right? But Republicans are not worse than Democrats. Democrats are actually equally bad. Because sure, Republicans have racist policies. They do anti-Black things. They say anti-Black things. But Democrats are the same way. They just hide it better. Their rhetoric towards Black people is nicer. But their policies are actually just as bad as the Republicans' policies, right? And there's a lot of evidence for that. Just think of, you know, the crime bill that Clinton passed. Just think of how, you know, most of the major cities that Black people live in are actually run by Democrats, right? And have been for decades. And we're still suffering in there, right? So, you know, Democrats, they don't do nothing for us. So when you understand that, while the Republicans are poop, the Democrats are just caca, there's no reason that you should vote for the Democrats in order to avoid the Republicans. Because why on earth would you pick up caca so you don't have to pick up poop? They're both the same thing. They're both the same thing. Right? There's that. Then as for third-party candidates, because quite frankly, or real talk, all the third parties that exist in the U.S. are just as anti-black. They're just as against black people. Well, let me not say all, but all of the well-known third parties in the U.S. are just as against black people as the two major ones. Because at the end of the day, they're run by white people, right? But so I'm not really advocating that we vote for like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, whatever. But in theory, let's say in theory, if if say magically some third party came about that was actually pro-black, right? The idea. Actually, let me edit what I'm saying in real time. Let me not even go there, because if sorry, I'm just thinking of how best to explain this, but no, I'll just say this for argument's sake, because what I'm trying to break down is they always make this argument that, oh, you shouldn't ever vote for a third party because it'll never win, right? That's basically what they say. You should never vote for a third party, black people, because it'll never win. But it's not true that that third party will never win, right? That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because after all, if most of the voters in the key states voted for the third party, because by the way, nothing is stopping them from doing that. If most of the voters in key states overall, and especially in swing states, voted for the third party, it would win. It's that simple. So if hypothetically, if in theory some third party came about that we saw served our interests, then the best thing for us to do would be to try and get people to vote for it, not to just say, oh, it'll never win, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, whether or not, people would I guess I'm sorry, let me think of how to explain this, but I guess whether or not, thinking about how to get non-blacks to vote for a third party that actually had black people's interests at heart, that's a different discussion. And even thinking about how much of our agenda a third party could have and actually win, that's also a different discussion. But the point I'm trying to make is that the only thing stopping a third party from winning is people not voting for it, right? There's nothing magic. So the argument that we shouldn't vote for a third party specifically because it would never win, that doesn't make sense, right? But then the bigger thing is, the thing Marc Lamont Hill didn't mention, and this is something the establishment doesn't want to talk about too much because it really scares them, is just the idea of people not voting. Because at the end of the day, right, the most important thing isn't who you vote for as a black person in this country. The most important thing is who you don't vote for, right? The most important thing is specifically that we don't vote for Democrats, right? Because when you do that, you maximize the likelihood that you get something out of the Democrats, right? Because the way things are set up, Democrats need black votes to win elections in America. That's just a fact. If black people didn't vote Democrats, Americans would not, or Democrats would not win any national elections. They wouldn't win any statewide elections in swing states. They wouldn't win any elections in a city that is divided Democrat, Republican. Like, it just would never happen, right? And they would basically just stop being a force in American politics, right? So then if you don't vote Democrat, you force them into a position where you make them have to think, okay, do we give black people some of what they want so we can get in power? Or do we stop existing as a political group? Do we stop existing as a political power? Or do we have to go out and try and get power by force? Right? So you force them into thinking about making that choice. Now, obviously, the choice we'd want them to make the most would be to just give us what we want so that they could stay in power, right? To cut off a deal, right? But again, they really ain't trying to give us what we want, right? So that, unfortunately, even though that is the most desired outcome, that's the outcome we want the most. And even though I will say I don't think it's 100% impossible, it's the one that is most likely not going to happen, right? It's the one that is least likely to happen. But, because y'all are probably going, okay, Shimoge, if that one's not going to happen, so then why should we avoid voting Democrat, right? Why do we want these other options? Well, let me tell you why. If the Puritans, right, the Democrats, right, because Democrats and Puritans is, that's the same thing. The Democratic Party is just there to keep the Puritans in power. That's what it is. If they take the second option, they just say, okay, we're no longer going to exist as a political power. And actually, when I think about it, that's probably well, let me not say that's still not what they're most likely to do, but that could happen. So, but if they say, okay, we're no longer going to exist as a political power, maybe we'll just suck it up and we're just going to link up with the planters and the Republicans, just accept, being second-class white citizens, or whatever, right? If they, if they go that way, then we've significantly hurt one of our enemies, right? So then they're not going to be harming us as much as they are now in general, right? Sure, we'd have other groups we still have to deal with, but that's one less group that we're specifically dealing with. At the very least, they're not going to be as strong when they're attacking us, right? But then also, that earns us more respect as a race, because everyone will know, whoa, remember that one time the Puritans messed with the blacks and the black people effed them up? That gets you some respect, right? Because part of the reason we don't have enough respect as a race is because other races, Eurasians, don't remember too many instances of us actually dealing with them seriously and defeating them, okay? They don't. Sure, there are ones they do remember and they try and keep it on the hush-hush, like the Haitian Revolution, for example, but all in all, they don't have too many memories of that, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. Probably on Chimoge's comments, when I eventually do like a deep dive into Black history and worldwide human history, we'll see why that is. It's just because, long story short, because we're so peaceful as a people, we weren't going out here just trying to beat up on other people, right? We weren't going out here looking to defeat other people, right? But anyway, as it relates to what I'm saying, we don't have too many documented, undeniable instances of a win against Eurasians in this struggle, especially not in the last few hundred years, right? Especially not in the last several decades, right? So then if we can go on record having put the Puritans out of commission, or at least, given them a good knock and made them stumble, if you get what I'm saying, that gets us more respect. That boosts our position in the world, right? So that's good. Then the third option is that the Puritans, of course, after they realize that they can't win elections anymore because we won't vote for them, they go, okay, we're just going to take power by force. And that one, I actually think that's probably the most likely option, unfortunately. So then y'all, again, are probably looking at me crazy going, okay, why would we want these people to trigger these people and get them to take power by force? I ain't trying to fight, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a good option because if the Puritans take power by force, it's going to be undeniable what they're doing. And when the oppression you face is undeniable, you wake up. Because probably the biggest problem we have as Black Americans today, and even Black people globally, is that too many of our people are asleep. Too many of our people are able to pretend that they ain't being oppressed, that they ain't got problems. They're able to pretend that the white people aren't their enemy, that Eurasians in general are not their enemy. They're able to blame all these other things if they want to blame anything. Maybe they'll just pretend there's not a problem. But if them Puritans come out with force in our face because they realize they can't win using elections anymore, everyone's gonna wake up. If not everyone, at least most people will wake up. At least most of the people who are asleep right now will wake up. And sure, it's going to be painful to wake up. The smack that wakes you up is painful. But it's only when you're awake that you can win the fight. Right? Because right now, we're trying to win a fight while we asleep. We're like, that's what we doing. But if those of us who are awake can get the Puritans to smack us and we all wake up, then we can win that fight for real. All right. Now, I hope you all follow me with that. Okay. And I'm going to do a lecture in the future where I'm basically going to say that again, probably provide you with some more evidence and stuff so that you can see even more what I'm saying. But that's really the basics of my argument that Black people need to stop voting Democrat, right? But as you can see, that's coming from a very different place than where she was coming from. And that's why in my overall thoughts on the video, I think that's an instance of them bringing someone on who is more radical than the position they want you to take, but still nowhere near radical enough or nowhere near correct enough. Because, part of me wants to stop using this word radical because I think it kind of, maybe I'll keep using it, but sometimes I feel like it doesn't, accurately describe what's going on. It doesn't give off the right vibe, but whatever. But she's not as correct as she needs to be, right? Her opinion's still off because she still has this kind of integrationist mentality. She still wants to be part of America. She still thinks that white people are on the same page as her. Her goal is to be able to have, in a very quick, short-term way, a nice relationship with white people in America, right? And the Democrats know that even if you're against voting for them, if they can get you on that type of time, you're still close enough to what they want that they can get you, right? So that's a case of them holding up someone who's not that radical as being the most radical person to deceive you. So those are my thoughts on that interview and what that was. Again, no disrespect to the sister, but I just got to keep it real. She was still off. So we got to keep in mind the chess games they play with us in the media, right? Because things are not always as simple as they seem. Things are usually not as simple as they seem, and you got to really look at things deeply, so you don't get deceived. But anyway, that's all I got for y'all tonight. And it doesn't look like anyone's got any questions, so I'm gonna call it a night. Thank you all so much for joining me. Again, please like the video, share it with people you know, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and then also subscribe or follow to the channel or account on other social media platforms. You know, this video is going to be on Facebook, it's going to be on Rumble, it's going to be on Instagram, everywhere. So wherever you're seeing this, just subscribe or follow so you can, you know, see all my videos that go up. If you're on YouTube, also hit the bell icon so you get a notification whenever I put out a new video. And then also hit the link that's in the description and in the live chat of the video on YouTube. It's in the description on all platforms, but on YouTube specifically, it's also in the live chat. That's the link to support our channel, because your support means a lot. You know, your bucks help me keep this going. Because, you know, this, I've said this before, I'm kind of, this is part of a business, but this end of my business kind of has a more activist spirit, right? Because all the content I put out through Chimoge's Comments America is available free, right? Because on my other networks, as part of OZ Benguku, right? The overall media company, there is some content that's behind a paywall, but all the content I'm putting out here, all the information I'm putting out, all the knowledge from Chimoge's Comments America is available free, because the idea is that, you know, I want to wake everyone, you know, all the oppressed people in America up, but especially all the black people in America up to what's going on, because we're at a critical moment. We have to take action immediately. So I'm trying to save lives out here. Might sound dramatic, but I'm dead serious, because stuff is real out here. But anyway, thank you all so much. Oh, and one last night announcement. I know I've been doing these lives on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I've been thinking of the scheduling of it, and my own schedule and everything. I'm actually going to change the time of the live stream. Going forward, the live streams for Chimoge's Comments America are actually going to be on Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, plus African time, of course, but Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, yeah, check me out. I'll begin with that the following week from this one. So this Tuesday, I'm going to put out something, just letting you guys know about that again. And then this upcoming Sunday, I'm going to put up some videos, just clips from my live streams, for y'all, just so y'all have something to watch in place of the live stream. But then the following week, we're going to begin with the new schedule. So I also just wanted to let y'all know about that. But I'll give out that message again so y'all know. Sorry to switch it up, but I just thought about it, and I think it's better to tweak the time, both for my own schedule, but then also I want to do it at a time that I think, you know, might be better for y'all as the audience as well. But anyway, yeah, thank you for bearing with me about that. But anyway, thank y'all guys so much. Good night, and see you next week.